Hello, everyone, and welcome to Anatomy of an Adaptation. This is a podcast that aims to compare and contrast classic novels with their cinematic adaptations. I'm your host, Nico Grasso, and I am joined once again by the good Carson Timar. How are you doing, Carson? It's lovely to have you back on the show.
I'm great. I'm always happy to be here. I think this is one of the more fun podcasts I do in my life. Survived AFI Fest, so excited to take a little break in the middle of awards season, in the middle of just like there's a million things I could be doing right now or watching right now to review and talk about a film and a story I have quite a history with. I'm excited to get into this. I swore one day that I would never talk about this again, and here I am. It's been a few years, back from the dead. We'll see how this goes.
We'll see. We'll see. I'm happy you were brave enough to join us in this conversation because, of course, today we're not alone. It's not just the two of us. We have first time guest on the podcast. He's been a good, just like letterbox friend of mine, fellow screenwriter, someone I've really admired over the years. Tuomas Kiiskinen, right? How are you
Yes,
doing, man?
Kiiskinen.
So happy to have you here.
I'm doing okay, a little bit sick and a little bit headache, but I'll manage.
Thank you for being here. I appreciate it. I know this cold, COVID, whatever, like it's hitting everyone. At least like
Yeah,
here in Europe, everybody you talk to is like have a little bit of a cough. I don't feel too good. I don't feel too great.
yeah,
Um, but we will power through. We will power through because today, of course, we're talking about one of the big awards contenders of 2021. You know, the pandemic starting to slowly vanish away. People were excited to go back to the movies, and Netflix was trying to be a new contender, a bigger contender than before with awards releases. And of course, this film, which I didn't know back in the day, is actually based on a novel, which is why today we're talking about 1967's The Power of the Dog by Thomas Savage and the 2021 Jane Campion adaptation.
1, 2, 3. To the side
Sorry,
again. 1.
I really
two.
can't. I really can't dance.
You're dancing. Here, this foot forward. Don't think. 1, 2, 3. To the side. 1, 2, 3. And back. 1, 2, 3. Told you I'd teach you. What is it, George?
I just want to say how nice it is not to be alone.
Since this is your first time on the podcast, Tuomas, I'm very interested to have you kind of like kick things off. We will primarily talk about the book first. What was your experience like reading this? Because I can take it for granted. All three of us had already seen the movie at
yeah.
least once, probably more times going into it. So, what was your experience reading Thomas Savage's novel? I also imagine it's your first book by him, right? Same for me, same for Carson, I
Oh,
guess.
definitely.
Mm.
I don't think he's like everyone who talks about it online says that he's the type of writer who's great, but who isn't well known. That he's kind of disappeared in the years.
Yeah.
So it makes him really interesting, and I loved reading the book because the film is very. It's not as broad. So the book, it takes like chapters, and it takes from different perspectives. Like Peter's father is an actual character in the book, and not just a person who exists like he's in the movie. Also, the book was surprisingly funny because every time Phil had his perspective, it was just so unabashed in his egoism. I laughed so many times when he was talking about how great he is, and how he knows everything. And every time he would come to a situation where he thought he knew what was happening, and then George would do something that he didn't predict, and he was immediately panicking because it didn't go as planned.
Yeah, Phil Burbank is quite the character in the book. There are many elements that we can touch upon here, but I'm curious now, Carson, as someone who, without spoilers, uh, is not a fan of the film. Maybe feelings have changed over the years. Who knows? Maybe they have. But how did you feel then reading this book? What was your experience similar to Thomas?
Yeah, no spoilers for my thoughts on the movie now. But I love this book. I really loved it. Like, I was surprised because why I agreed to do this podcast and really wanted to be on this episode is like, I'm not a big Jane Campion fan in general. I don't think it's fair for me to judge a source material if she's the one adapting it. So I was like, let's go into it with an open mind. I love this century of like American literature from mid-century, exploring like masculinity and exploring and evolving America. It checks all the boxes for a book that I would love, and I really did. Phil is such a amazing character when you're able just to exist completely in his head with every single thought he has, every judgment. It is absolutely very funny. It's very entertaining. But there's also such more of a sense of humanity and personality to these characters and to this world they exist in, even when they're faced with like the isolation of the West and how you have to have this performative masculinity, or if you slip up, everyone is like gonna like make fun of you for it. All those elements, you still get this sense of such a more well-rounded character that has so many more layers to him, I guess I would say, than the film presents, in a way that I found very compelling as you get towards the end. I also think it's just like super, super clean of a book. It's not the shortest book in the world, and it does like linger on certain things, but it feels in a way that's like very natural. It really feels like you're out on the West spending these winters or spending these summers with these characters, like going through these routines, riding horses. You get the people who come to town, and like you go through that routine, but with this humanity and I guess this authenticity. And I'm sure we'll get into the author's life, and a lot of this is based around his reality and his authenticity in writing this story. I think that bled through wonderfully. I really I wouldn't even say like, oh, I just enjoyed the book. I like love the book.
Mm.
I'm very happy to hear that, actually. Yeah. I don't know, Thomas.
Yeah, I was thinking I did get a pretty humane impression of film in the book. In the movie, I especially like the ending, the way he starts being more emotional, and it's very clear that he's overcompensating. So I empathized with him in this sense. But the book does something really different. It kind of has him being more mean, and then the book has the side characters who interrupt the meanness, like his parents speculating about that he's a little bit weird, and then they remarked about how George is nice, and then it, they have this kindness to them that doesn't come through in the movie, because you don't know anything about what they're thinking or what they're talking to each other. You just see how they're being polite when they're
Hmm.
over there with the boys.
Yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
so in this sense, the book was more well-rounded and definitely more humane.
Totally. Totally. I have to say, like, I have to share the same feelings that both of you have shared, because I really love this book in a way I was not expecting. Again, I heard good praise about it. I
Mm,
went into it with an open mind, and more so than just like really liking the book, loving the book, I was surprised by the amount of perspectives that we get.
yeah.
And you both have mentioned it, but just the way that the book opens, again, like Montana, 1925, very far away time and place, like 100 years literally from the time we're recording this. Um, but there are so many elements in it that connect to the way that masculinity and societal expectations haven't really changed
Mm,
over a century for something so specific to Central America, kind of 100 years ago. It still resonates to this day. And I think having those different perspectives where you jump from one character to the other, you are focused on Phil, who's essentially, we can say, the protagonist slash antagonist of the book. You go to young Peter, you go to George, who's a bit too simple and a bit too nice, maybe,
mm,
but still has certain pressures and expectations that he wants to adhere to a higher society. You jump to the parents, and you see and you follow them quite a bit in the way that they, as you both mentioned, just like what they want from their children and how they are just living a completely different lifestyles that they are. And especially you mentioned it, Tuomas, but the entire chapter near the beginning of the book that focuses on the father of Peter and the husband of Rose was really, really touching. And
Mm.
it's something that I could honestly say about almost every chapter in this book. But
Yeah.
following the story of a doctor who's so promising with life and there's so much ambition and just squanders it because of some stupid mistakes that just get worse and worse and worse, and the way that the people around him, including Phil, treat him and make him feel, lead him through to a dark, dark path, which again, it's something that I find beautiful about literature in general. We will talk more properly about the film itself in the way that Campion decides to adapt it. But I love that you can have a book like this that just jumps constantly from character to
Mm.
character to perspective in a way that's engaging, that's clever. It's not heavy prose, but it
Yeah.
gets very beautiful and poetic at times. It's like sneaks up on you, right? There are moments where it's just banal because this is not a glamorous lifestyle. He's not trying. Thomas Savage is not trying to paint this as a idyllic western with John Wayne types running around and having romances. It's simple, a bit boring, you know. There's lots of cows getting castrated and calves, all of that. Um, but yeah, no, really, really good book. And I think in terms of like points that we can jump into, I think Carson, what you mentioned about Thomas Savage, I don't know if Thomas, the version of the book you read, had this part,
Which one?
but there is um, an interesting like afterword in a copy of the book that I found that basically features one of the experts on Savage that's kind of like recounting his life story and pointing out just how much of the power of the dog actually happened to him, to the point that basically, to put it as simple as possible, and maybe Carson, you can take it away from here, Thomas Savage is Peter.
Mm.
Right?
Yeah.
Like in the simplification of things.
Well, so to be clear, I did not read the afterword because the version I got sent it was not opening. So I read the Wikipedia page quickly. So if there are more details to this, feel free to go for it. But really, it sounds to me like Savage, it's a twofold as far as him being in this. When he was young, he lived with his stepfather in Montana, so he obviously sees himself within that character. But then also, he's very much so known as being like this closeted gay man who had to hide his sexuality, who had these really intimate, quick relationships with men across his time, living in Montana, living in the ranch, and doing this thing. So he's projecting himself, I think, very clearly on both characters, right? He's both the closeted gay tough man who has to adhere to these social norms, who has to go through this routine of toughness and masculinity. But he also was that young boy moving in with this new family who maybe had some issues with his stepfather. So from my reading, and again, Nick, I would love, because I think you're the only one here then who read this specific afterward. I would, it seems to me like this is a very, very on almost every level of personal story when you get into the ending, especially in the book. And I don't know how deep we're going with spoilers in this thing, but I think that duality of personification of his own experience really shines in that ending conflict. But I'm sure we'll get to that in a minute. But Nick, I'd love to hear if there's more details in there.
Lots of details just about, especially the relationship that Savage had with his stepfather, to the point that there are so many parallels with the way that Phil behaves to the way that the stepfather behaves. He was essentially fantasizing about murdering him. And he kind of brought this, the way that the writer explained it is something that by creating the character of Phil and having, and of course, like you were afraid, Carson, we can go full spoilers here, people. We're
Let's
spoiling the
do.
entire story of Power of the Dog. By killing Phil with a righteous comeuppance, you could say, at the end of it, every time a reader experiences the power of the dog, his stepfather is dying again and again, over and over. It's like endless catharsis. It's very sick in a way that I admire. Actually, it's very twisted.
Mm.
Um, but yeah, and yeah, I'm curious, Thomas, if you have any thoughts about this, because I do want to tackle also just the queerness of the story, which is so fascinating. But yeah, take it away.
Yeah, uh, yeah. The final scene where Peter touches Phil's hand, and then Phil starts remembering the final moments he had with Bronco Henry. That stuff like hit hard because it doesn't. The movie has that some similar kind of melancholy with the ending, but it doesn't quite capture the same feeling because I could easily, when I read that part of the book, I could easily imagine an image of a young Phil watching his idol get trampled, and it was so sad. Uh, it just hits, and I found it really interesting because even though the book has several hints about Phil being gay, it it kept it fairly ambiguous until that point, and then it just hits you with it that yes, this is the reality. That this isn't just some guy who's a little bit peculiar. This is a self-repressing gay man. That's who he is. Uh, but even then, it's the final note to his story. But even then, it doesn't feel like it's the most like the biggest thing about him. It's the thing that's lying under the surface, but it's the tragedy of his story because so much of his character is defined by how aggressive he is and how forced his entire personality and life is.
Yeah,
Well, not to jump,
it's
and I want to mention quickly because I agree with Thomas. I
please.
love in the book, and I think the story is so unique because there's so few stories that I feel this way about. But I love the fact that while queerness is obviously present, it's obviously a root in a lot of Phil's behavior and things you can break down and recontextualize without understanding. This story in general, I don't think is defined by queerness in the way of a lot of other stories. There's a lot more at play here. There's a lot more at work, and ultimately that moment of violence towards the end. And we'll get with how the movie uses queerness because I really don't think it works nearly as well. That moment of violence at the end is not defined by queerness in any way.
Mm.
It is for Phil, you get that reveal, but it is not. For example, like a hate crime. It's not because
Yeah.
he is gay. It is because of his actions and his cruelness. Again, we'll get how the movie tackles that. But I think it's a very, very interesting layer to fold into a story like this to where it doesn't recontextualize the entire thing. Is I wouldn't look at this and say, oh, this is a queer novel or this is a
Yeah.
book about just analyzing queerness at the time. It's so much more about masculinity. And yes, you have energy and moments that are like about queerness. But I find that to be a really interesting fold of the novel, especially.
Yeah, you're not gonna find this on the LGBT shelf at your local bookstore. Um,
I actually
yeah,
saw I saw some
um,
reviews of the movie which were like criticizing this aspect that it's making gay caricatures and it's vilifying gay people. And I was thinking,
I,
eh.
I, that's a reach. That's it's I think it's I don't know. I think it's like it has become a cliche. I don't even know if it was before because of course I wasn't around back then.
Mm,
But the cliche of the gay cowboy, I always think of directly of Brokeback Mountain. That's
mm,
become like the epitome of that. But beforehand, it was never really that explicit, generally speaking.
yeah.
You could write a whole book about, take the Western genre, both in literature and cinema, and find queer coded characters and homoerotic relationships all day long in virtually all movies that came out from the 20s onward. But with this story, I agree with what both of you said, especially you, Carson, with the idea of like it's not it's a story that talks about queerness, but it's not a queer story. It's not at the center of it all, but it is at the core of Phil. And you mentioned it, Thomas. Like I love that passage. That says so much about the character. It's something you can kind of feel as you're reading the book. Like he's definitely someone who's trying to protect himself in the worst way possible by just causing harm to others, by putting himself on top of everyone and dominating them. But the moment where he just opens up and he's saying like, I'm feeling those feelings again. I'm reliving those memories. He's essentially stuck in the past. That's something he does constantly. Every occasion he gets, reminds you of good old Bronco Henry. Like they goes, you know what Bronco Henry would have done if he were here, just like constantly bringing him up to the point that I kind of like, I do wonder. It was funny. There were some, I think it was still in the afterword that I read, where they mentioned some of the reviews of the time where barely anyone really caught on Phil being gay, closeted
Mhm.
homosexual.
I'm not surprised.
I just like the idea of people like reading it in 67, like, you really like this friend. They were really close, his mentor, you know. Um, and there is some tragedy to it, to the idea of him. The moment he starts to open up, maybe there's some hope for the future. Maybe it could lead to grooming with Peter. You don't really know. It's murky waters, but from his perspective, because that's what we are reading in that chapter, it feels like he's finally finding some tenderness. Very simple, like it's a touch of a hand, but that's a
Mhm.
level of intimacy he hasn't received in years, decades potentially. It's brutal, and it's something that you see, however, with all of the other characters in this book. It's something that I know you don't like, Carson, but it's something that actually Jane Campion mentioned. I was watching some of the behind the scenes of the film, and she mentioned that Thomas Savage, despite writing about this man, is a very feminine writer in the way that he approaches the character's emotions, which is kind of like a broad sentiment. But looking back at the book, like especially the way he writes Rose, her descent into alcoholism, and a woman who just she wasn't really looking for George to come sweep her off her feet and save her. She was living a simple, banal, boring life as a widow. It's like it's fine, she's making a living, that's enough for her. And the moment she gets a little something more, she starts having some more intimacy and companionship. That's where things are going bad for her, where she hopes for more, she could want more, but both George's increasing coldness and Phil's emotional, psychological torment just erodes at her to the point that she essentially starts living in a prison. Right, this ranch becomes this glorified, gilded, like a bronze cage in the middle of nowhere where she can do anything. It's something you see with all the other characters. I don't know if any of you have some specifics that particularly caught your attention, or interest with any of these characters.
I mean, I would say the character of George is pretty interesting, right? Just in the sense of that he tries to escape, right? He tries to go to college, he
Mm.
tries to follow in that career or in that pathway that Phil ultimately rejected, and then he fails. And it feels very much so trapped in the sense of like he, for whatever reason, right? Whether it's because of a lack of ambition, a lack of ability, or a lack of faith in himself, because he just is destroyed by that attempt at gaining that career. It does feel like he's just stuck on this ranch in a very similar way. It's really tragic, but
I mean, I feel in a way that George is the type of character who disappears into himself. That's the
Mm.
relationship he has with Phil, because Phil steps on him and George makes himself small. So George gives up if with things a lot. And when I was thinking about my favorite passages, the one at the college where Philo goes through the initiation thing, and then he moves to George joining him 2 years later, and George is sitting at his room waiting for guys to come for him, but no one comes.
So sad. So sad.
It was the saddest part of the book for me, but I forgot where it was, so I picked another passage.
and he hears them singing outside, and he goes like, "So I just put on my new pajamas and went to bed." Like that quiet defeat is so heartbreaking.
Mm, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
You know
It
what?
it
One,
yeah.
one
Sorry, go
thing.
ahead.
One thing I found interesting about the book is that when when the when Peter's father has the running with the ranchers at the bar, we don't know that it's Phil and George, but then we find out that it's Phil and George. The book says that George was the one who beat Johnny up, and I was really surprised by that, because I was thinking about Jesse Plemons as the face of the character, and I just
Mm.
couldn't imagine him doing it at all. And I found it a little bit weird, because the book doesn't really have anything else with George which was like that. that he would get into a physical altercation like that, and he would like rough up another person. So that was probably the part that I found a little bit weird, because he didn't do anything else like that with him.
Yeah, yeah, fair. Maybe just drunk or really bothered by the behavior.
Yeah,
It is also part of a social context where maybe to prove himself or to show up in some way, to like to
mm,
send a message of sorts, he acts in a violent way. There is some subdued, not I don't want to say subdued anger with him, but there is also an element of repression with him.
yeah,
With the way I like how his courtship of Rose is incredibly calculated. There is sweetness to it. It's not without romance, of course, but it's made by someone who basically says like, I like that girl, that woman, I want to marry her. And that's like all the only thought in his mind. And once you know that, like, you can just feel it in the entire book up
mm,
until the moment they actually get married. It's just like, that's all I need to do, that's all I need to focus on, everything else doesn't matter. um and again, no, the social context of that scene of Johnny getting drunk and too rowdy and then getting beat up by George and told off by Phil. It is a social context where they're surrounded by other people, they're surrounded by their peers, and it's present multiple times in the book. I think maybe Carson, you mentioned it, something with Peter, the way he gets hazed essentially, or called I don't remember like the actual words that they use, the
Nancy boy.
ranchers. Yeah, they essentially call him a sissy, a girl, because he's just, he's slim and is different from them. He's not quote unquote a real man.
Mm,
He is not. He doesn't fit and belong into this world of strong people who are bulky and just doing dirty work. He wants to be a doctor. He wants to be a surgeon. It's like fine care, with the nice clothes in perfect places, and doing all of that. And you see how all of those expectations and pressures of the people surrounding you kind of shape the way you behave, kind of shape the way you are, and it extends to all of these characters, but it even extends into the historical element. Something we haven't mentioned yet, this book really 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 takes into account when it is set, again,
mm,
1925 Montana. And there is an entire chapter, I would say one of my favorite chapters. There's many chapters that I would consider my favorites though. But the chapter where we are following a family of Native Americans who are just trying to get on the ranch just to see a tombstone, a grave, a symbol of the old chief that passed away. The property, like, where the chief used to be, is now the Burbank property. And it's this long journey that they have to take. We're talking like days and days in a cart with the horses just to see this one grave. That chapter, the way it tackles Native American identity, the genocide that happened in the states, to have the United States of America, to have what we have now, for a book written in, I mean, I'm not an expert in any way of Western fiction. For a book written in 1967, it's really, really strongly tackled. It feels respectful. It feels pointed, direct,
mm.
doesn't squander words, and it humanizes them in a way that's, again, heartbreaking. That entire chapter and the way it culminates again with Phil once again perpetuating an act of violence, in this case purely emotional, primarily emotional violence, really hit me. I don't know how you two felt actually about this. Tuomas, maybe you have some thoughts.
Uh, I mean, I don't know if I felt as highly of it, but I thought it was definitely very intentional and very well used. And it definitely, the contrast between how the man and the son, how the man viewed himself and the things he kept important, and then you switch to Phil's perspective, and then he starts
Mm-hmm.
talking about how they're thieves and whatnot. It's the contrast and the clash that makes it sad and uncomfortable. So it definitely works for the whole. and and there's and it fits the entirety of the book being about masculinity in a way, and how an identity and how we view ourselves and so on.
Yeah. Don't know if Carson, you have some thoughts.
No, I mean, I also really like that chapter, and I think what it really echoes to, I think, is it has to. I think this conversation keeps coming back to like, why would he at this time period? Why would he have such this take, this like pretty nuanced, pretty empathetic take that maybe a lot of the world at the time, let's say, much less literature wouldn't necessarily have. And I think a lot of that just keeps coming back to like his authenticity. I guarantee you, he knew these communities in a way where he came to them with that empathy and came with that like understanding of humanity, I guess, and was able to write them in that way, similar to how he writes queerness or masculinity or any of these topics we're talking about. Um, the fact that he lived this life, the fact that he lived on these ranches with these people, it allows him to have that perspective that if you were a writer in New York at the time, just fantasizing about the West or what it was like to be a rancher, I don't think you would come to these same nuanced conclusions and be able to write a story like this. So I really just think this is another area that probably echoes that lived experience.
Definitely.
Definitely. Yeah.
I think that kind of circles back to the remarks Campion made about him being a feminine writer. The term is a little bit silly, but
Jane
I,
Campion says, Jane Campion's word.
I mean, it's a little bit silly, but I don't think it's entirely unreasonable. Because if you have a simplistic idea of men and women, a lot of women have a more measured point of view where they come from, and they take more into consideration. So if you work,
Empathy.
if you work with these really strict caricatures, the remark makes sense and it shows in the book. But of course, we are more complicated than that. So it's not too surprising that he is a man who writes like this. But the content is definitely something that shows the depth and the variety and how well considered everything is. Like you can easily tell that there's a lot where it's coming from, and there's a lot that's simmering under the surface.
Yeah, 100%. I think this is also a good point to actually transition into the film, kind of like embrace the adaptation. I love Carson's face for the listeners. He's very excited. He can't wait. He can't wait. The moment has come. Actually, embrace this adaptation and just jump into the differences and thoughts that we have with this film. I can actually start off because I had the honor and the privilege of watching this at the Venice Film Festival together with a friend of the podcast, Jackie Luke Sharp, someone who also really didn't like the film after the first viewing. But I remember watching it, and this is gonna get a little bit personal in a way, but I remember that was like between 2020 and 2021 was the period when I started questioning my own sexuality a little bit and being like, no, is it just those stupid like, is it a phase maybe or no? Like, am I bisexual? Maybe it's something else. Who knows? And I remember watching The Power of the Dog in Venice really hit me in a way I couldn't even really talk about it with myself at the time. But there was something that I found really moving. I generally really like the film. I think it's very well put. Like, it looks great especially for those Netflix originals that tend to come out. I think it's one of the best looking films that Netflix has made. The Johnny Greenwood score with the piano and the emotional melodic music that he puts in there, the romantic theme is just excellent as always. Cast top notch. I mean, you can't go wrong here. I think we can talk about some of the nuances or lack thereof, but I think that's mostly a matter of direction. But yeah, the way I would say that more so than the book, the film could qualify as a queer story. And I say this like in quotes because it's a bit loose what we even want to consider a queer story, but Campion makes that kind of the focus. You cannot have all of those characters. You cannot jump back in time 50 years, 20 years, whatever, constantly switching perspectives. I mean, you could, but it would be a mess. So she hones in and she's like, okay, George is getting married with Rose. There's tension in the household. Peter comes. Phil starts feeling emotions again, but it's too late. He has to die because change has to come. That's kind of like the film in a nutshell. And for me, it works. Even rewatching it now, it's my third time watching the film. It still works. I still see, like, differently from the film, there are differences in the character of Phil. Is slightly more likable in some ways and more hateful in others. There's always a bit of a dissonance in reading a character's thoughts and feelings and then just seeing them on screen. Um, but I've known Phils in my life. I've seen some Phils in my life. I've seen people who are clearly trying to make up for something else or trying to hide something more to themselves than to the others. And yeah, I watched it at the right time, and so it has still a little special place in my heart. Tuomas, what was it like for you watching The Power of the Dog the first time and then revisiting it for the podcast?
I mean, for the first time, I absolutely loved it. I wrote like 1,200 words about it, and it was for the longest
Nice.
my most liked review. I've now deleted it, but I actually didn't make it in time, so I didn't rewatch it now. But I rewatched it back in July, and I didn't love it as much. I'm not sure why, but it had some kind of lack of oomph. So I still thought it was great, but it wasn't quite on that level that I remembered it to be. But now having read the book, I think parts of it are simply because of the difference between film and novels, that it can't be so sprawling, so it's more straightforward and to the point. And
Mm-hmm.
reading the book, I think I like more the final note for film when it comes to his sexuality, while in the film, uh, there's more shots of him embracing things, which are clearly sexually toned, and then there's his stash of magazines, which are very blunt, and
Bronco
I'm
Henry's stash. Bronco Henry has
yeah
written his name on some of those.
yeah I'm not sure I really like that anymore after reading the book, because it's so much more blunt.
It's a hammer. It's a hammer compared
Mm,
to what the novel does. Um, Carson, how about you? Take it away. The floor is yours. The moment has
So
come. One last
when I
time.
of course, I was so excited for this movie back in 2021. To be clear, I was like, "This would be great." Oh, Jack hated it. This is before I realized Jack like we're on the same wavelength a lot of the time. So I was like, "Oh, I'm sure he's just like what a weird guy who runs Clapper." Like, I'm sure this is gonna be good. Everyone else loves it. And from the first time I watched it, no, I hate this movie. I think this movie is absolute trash. I think, and sadly, it was already buried 6 feet down for me in my opinions. Reading the book now is just poured concrete over the grave. Like, there's no way this bitch is ever gonna. This is awful. Number one, I'll say, like, I think it's a terrible adaptation. And what it really comes down to, I think, and this is one of the reasons I brought up so explicitly the authenticity of Savage writing the novel, is
mm,
because what you have here is a straight cis white woman from New Zealand who trying to reflect on the American West through a lens of queerness, which is in no way authentic to herself. It's not authentic to the actors playing these characters. There's no sense of authenticity in the film, so it really quickly becomes just like fan fiction, to be honest. That's how I view
mm,
the film. Is it's like you take the original and you just have again this straight white woman making fan fiction about like, oh my god, gay cowboys. It makes queerness such a bigger focus. Throughout the film, as you mentioned with the magazines, it really becomes a queer, as you mentioned, Nick, a queer forward story, which I think completely erases and mutilates the ending and the complexities of that emotional ending, where you have Phil being judged for his actions and the son trying to help his mother, and like the basic bones of that is still here, but it becomes much more centered. It feels like a homophobic almost act of violence. You have, even as he's tying the rope, they're like, tell us the story, were you naked, like almost confirming the queerness before he kills him. I think that goes off the rails. I also just think Benedict Cumberbatch is horrific here. I think it's like one of the worst performances of
Wow.
that year. He's awful. And I think worst of all, and this is not Campion's fault per se, though granted a better director like Luca Guadagnino could have done this just like he did with Call Me by Your Name. But when you have a character that is all in the head, and you get all these thoughts and you get that complexity just by being in his mind, where yes, Phil is brutal and Phil is a bashing force that you don't necessarily love, you still get like his justifications to a point, you still see his humanity and how his brain works, because you cannot just consistently have that stream of thoughts. The film has to decide how to show those inner thoughts. And I think Power of the Dog does a really, really poor job at this. I think it just makes him this just completely, it just removes, I guess, the complexity and the humanity to that character. And then it just wants to have this really cheap, in my opinion, ending of like, but he was gay. And the world hates gay people, so don't you see why he was awful? And it's like, yeah, I get that to a point. But as we just discussed for 40 minutes at this point with the book, there's so much happening here with masculinity, with history, and with isolation on the ranch. And while you get maybe brief pauses here, I think the choice just to really heighten the queerness is a genuine mistake with this story. And I think Campion in general also just like doesn't know how to write queerness. It doesn't come off as authentic. I mean, like, Nick, what a beautiful story about your personal coming of age. Not to discredit that at all, but like Jane Campion is just like the straight white woman who doesn't know how to write queerness. So it comes off as so authentic and inauthentic and so one note. As a queer person, I really struggled with this film. I really was like, this is horrific representation. I don't care that they're villainizing a queer character. I mean, who cares about that? But rather, I just think it doesn't dive into like the complexities of queerness at all. And it's not shocking to me, not to discredit anyone, but like that it was a lot of these straight white men that award season who were promoting this film and championing this film and protecting Jane Campion like she was an infant crawling around that could not take responsibility for anything. I found it really interesting during this award season. Not that we need to get into the full press junket, we'd be here all week with my thoughts. But there was I want to say maybe Kevin Costner or like a Kevin Costner type who like literally works and grew up on ranches, who was like this straight man talking about masculinity in the West and the history of that. And he was very critical on a red carpet about this. He was like, well, I just didn't feel like it was authentic to the American masculine soul. Like this time period, it filmed in New Zealand. Like it's not an authentic piece. And both Jane Campion and of course all of film Twitter were like, oh my God, you're a devil. Why would you ever say this about the perfect film and about this woman? Horrible. Why would you ever say this? And it's like, no, but I actually agree with him. Like, I do think you can feel that in a point that, especially when compared to the novel, I just think the novel is such a richer text. So that's kind of generic statements, but I'm sure we'll get more into it. But no, I hate this movie. I especially on a rewatch, like horrible. The one saving grace is I think Jesse Plemons and Kirsten Dunst are both really good here. And I think that story, that tenderness of that story, the straight relationship survived somehow. Isn't that weird how that worked out? That relationship and their like drama, I think that connects perfectly fine for me. Everything else here, except the score. The score is wonderful. Outside of that, everything else here I think is pretty terrible.
I love the score, but I also think it's kind of a problem because it is so sharp. It takes a certain sensitivity from the story away because it's so uncomfortable that it puts you in that mindset, and it doesn't really allow the sadness to quite sit in.
It's borderline played like a thriller. You could genuinely take some of those scenes, the Dark Knight, Phil playing the banjo in the bed, the silhouette behind the door, all those things, with Rose like cowering in the alley trying to drink and he's whistling. Like, those are scenes that come straight out of a thriller's playbook, something that Campion has done. I really like In the Cut. It's probably my favorite film of hers, actually. But I don't necessarily see it like it's. I think at the core of the conversation now from my side, of course, it's the podcast. It's the reason why we're here. It's not just to talk about the film, but to talk about it as an adaptation. And this has to be one of the most challenging, emotionally speaking, for me, experiences. Just to because the book really was really good. Like really, really, really good. And I rewatched the film after reading the book. And I read the book, I want to say, like almost 2 months ago at this point. For some reason, like I started reading it way earlier than we were going to record this. But there are passages in it that I still thought of since then that I still think of. And just even talking about them with both of you, I was just like, fuck, it's a good book. Like I really should read it again. With the film, again, how can you adapt the book? I'm trying to think, if I were to take that novel, how would I adapt it? Like, what would I focus on? I don't think there's anything different outside of tone, and we'll get into it. Narratively, just like taking just the story as is. I think they did take out the right parts.
Mm.
I think you don't need all of the historical context because it doesn't really add much to it. We don't need to spend time with the parents or see John in the past. Or maybe that's something you focus more on. You focus on the cycles of violence, of pressure on men, on to perform in a certain way in society, to be the breadwinners, be this, be that. Um, which is again interesting that it's coming from Jane Campion. I think it's almost a cliche of sorts at this point. It feels like, oh, you take established art house female filmmaker to do a story about men because they have a different sensibility about it and they see things differently, which makes it funnier to think that she said in the documentary, in the behind the scenes, Thomas Savage is a feminine writer. He has these qualities to him that he sees the world differently. Um, it's kind of like this. It's a fun contrast to think about for sure. But even rewatching the film, I didn't mind those. Like I didn't mind how overtly queer she made it, or they made it, the whole team, to be honest, to the point of borderline parody. I forgot the porn stash of muscular man just hidden away. I completely forgot that. I swear to you, I did not remember uh, Phil sensually massaging himself with mud and a scarf. I was watching the film. I was like, oh, yeah, this was not in the book. I'm pretty sure I don't remember reading anything about this or even remembering it from the previous viewings. But then again, I also still like those scenes in a way. If we want to take Phil the film character, um, he's always hiding from the others. It doesn't take baths. That's something that actually mentioned directly in the book as well. It's like he doesn't like taking baths. He always goes to the river just to be by himself, and it's almost like he's uncomfortable with his own nakedness, surrounded by other people. You see the other men who go take the swimming dip, skinny dipping, sorry, together, and they're fine with that, and they're just dudes being bros, just real men hanging out together. But he's always acting as the leader, which gives him the opportunity to be by himself more often. And that's when he goes naked. That's when he has those moments of sensuality, of just coming to terms with who he is in a safe environment. And I feel like the moment that Peter actually sees him, instead of the instant reaction from him is violence, he yells at him, what are you doing? Runs at him. But then you see this shift. It could be taken in a more negative way of, again, I mentioned the grooming possibility is always behind the corner. That's probably what happened with Bronco Henry, unless we want to kind of idealize it, because he was like 18, 19 when they
Mm.
spent the night together, if not more nights together. Um, the same age difference that's with Peter and him now, at that 1925. But it's I don't know. I think the violent act at the end is the only thing that actually slightly sours me on the story as a whole in the way that it's presented in the film. Mainly because it makes me rewatching it. I was thinking, what's the point? In a way that's more to myself, not necessarily to the film itself. Like, what is the point of showing it like this, of doing it like that? And I think and I'm sorry if I'm just rambling on, but I
No,
feel
no
like
problem.
the personal experience that Savage has, that it put really directly into the novel, the catharsis, of being like, this man, I saw myself in that man and I hated that man and I need to kill him to go beyond that. I think it's very strong and very interesting and so complex psychologically. Like, oh God, to write a story like Power of the Dog, hoping that people will feel the same catharsis you feeling just writing the death of this man who made your life hell and who embodies everything you hate.
Oedipus
In
of
the
the dog.
yeah, in the film, because it's played almost like a thriller, because Peter is much more of a psychopath, honestly. He's like Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer, age 18 kind of thing, where he's like, yeah, I'm just a doctor cutting up the rabbit and doing this and that and killing, like, even, which is a small detail that kind of made me chuckle in the film, he shocks Phil by killing the rabbit after he asks him to put him out of his misery, maybe because he was not expecting that of him. I was like, oh, he's a sweet boy, maybe he's not going to be able to do it. But then he does, and he's like, oh, fuck, okay. I don't know.
Isn't
Maybe
that in
because
the
of the
movie also?
swiftness. No, sorry?
Isn't that in the movie also?
Yeah, in the movie as well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But just because of the way everything is portrayed in the movie, it felt slightly odd rewatching it.
Mm.
Um,
I do
but
like
yeah,
love the
there's
reaction in the book. What the hell?
yeah. It's again, it's that introspective narration that you cannot really have in a film. Even though, again, I do actually really like Benedict Cumberbatch in here.
Mm.
But yes, I find it actually, Carson. I'm thinking about what you mentioned, and then I'll let you to speak because I'm going on for too long. The fact that yes, the movie essentially ends and like the marriage is saved, which is what happens in the book essentially. Like, the
Yeah.
kid wants to save the mother. It's the first lines in the film actually. Like rewatching, I was like, oh yes, like he loves his mother and he would do anything to protect her. Essentially, that's the line from the Bible that the title comes from. It opens the book, it closes the film. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like the more we're gonna talk about this, the more mixed I will feel about the movie. Maybe, but I don't know, Carson. Maybe you want to
But
take
yeah,
it away.
well, and I hope you love the movie after. My goal is not to make you hate. Be empowered. I love
You're making
love
me
the
hate
movie.
it, Carson.
I support everyone loving any movie they love, unless it's like Mickey 17. Then you're invalid. But like, I hope everyone loves everything else. No, like I think it's though like crucial. Number one, I'll say I disagree with you. I think the parents needed to be in this because also in the book it's really interesting that George is also like pretty weird about being naked. Also, he takes a bath once a month. I think it was like he is
No, that was
not maybe
Phil.
as far. No, they both. So Phil has never taken a bath in there, and then Phil goes down to the lake or whatever. Then
Ooh.
George, I think, takes it like once a month. It's more regular. It's not as intense as Phil, but clearly, like, it's something going on. The brothers have never seen each other naked. They make that very clear. To where, like, I do actually think the context of the parents is pretty important, and that being removed is pretty rough. But I think with Campion, by adding stuff like the porn stash and his queerness throughout, it makes Phil a lot more of a sympathetic character, which is not necessarily like inherently wrong, right? Like in the book there is definitely a tense like a sense of like tragedy in the sense of this killing, though I think ultimately then it transitions into like almost this monstrous figure being brought down, and then you get the wife and the husband able to enjoy their lives like the monster is defeated. In the book, or in the movie, excuse me, it really changes it by adding so much more, I think, of that queerness and a lot of that sympathy to Phil, because then the act is radically different, where it feels like the monster is this boy who killed this like misunderstood queer man, which is the truth. Again, it's on paper it's very similar, but I think the projection is very, very different, to where the emotions at the end, the happiness and the freedom felt by Kirsten Dunst and Jesse Plemons, it feels a lot more wicked. It doesn't hit in the same way as it does in the book for me, and I think that is where primarily the issue of that queerness being expressed in the way it is in the movie, and I think Campion's overall take on Phil for me really lessens that ending.
I didn't quite feel that. I thought when the revelation happens in the end of the book that it's the perfect moment to reveal how tragic of a character Phil truly is. So when he gets killed by Peter, it's very, oh, he didn't have to die, but that maybe he couldn't have changed, but the fact that he dies, it's a little bit, if only his life had gone a little bit differently, none of this would have had to happen. So it wasn't like completely happy for me, but when he does die, there is a sense of it's simultaneously relieving but also sad, because he died, but Peter's mother is at peace now, and she doesn't have to worry. So it's a little bit of both. I think Savage handles it well, that he kind of has his cake and eats it as well. He kills his stepfather, but he also humanizes him.
and humanizes him through elements that he relates to as himself as an adult.
Yeah.
So yeah, you do get a catharsis of, absolutely, you get that duality of emotions for sure.
Yeah, and I will also add, there is what makes the ending of the book, the final chunk of it, really impactful emotionally, is the perspective. Since you're experiencing those feelings and those things through Phil's eyes, I think there is something, if we want to like twist it a little bit, the way we're looking at it, there is something beautiful in the way that he just dies right after he has experienced, for the first time in so long, for the last time in so long, he has re-experienced and reawakened feelings of love that he had completely hidden away for the rest of his life. You can look at it in such a way that it's almost a I mean, it's a piece of fiction, of course, so take it with a grain of salt. Like, it's a good thing that he died right after. It doesn't He has gone out on a high note. I mean, he dies of anthrax, but he has gone out on a high note emotionally right before. Okay. While in the film, because of the way it's put together, because of the way it's shot, it's scored, um, and it's just more objective, regardless of how we want to internalize feelings through cinema. It is an objective medium. The way we all see the images is always the same. We can feel them differently, but that scene with the eroticization of the saddle of Bronco Henry constantly throughout the movie, the gesture of the hands and the things, it's bordering closer on, which is it is what it is, actually, manipulation on Peter's part.
Yeah.
It's just like, hey, my plan. Yeah, take this piece of rawhide. Oh, okay. Oh, where did you find? Trust me, I want to be like you. It's like, oh, fuck. Okay, it feels a bit more insidious, which makes, actually, now that I'm saying it, I understand where you're coming from, Carson, more than I ever have, more than I ever have in the past 4 years.
But
But I don't.
that's actually the
Sorry.
same. That's actually the same in the book as well, because he does say that because of this happened, he can now pivot and do a different plan. That it's an expansion of that, but it's
Yeah.
not like a completely different thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
all there, definitely.
Yeah, and again, it's a rare case. I think more than ever, this is a podcast about adaptations. More often than not, we end up talking a lot about screenplay. I think this is one of very few instances, maybe even the first one, where direction, like a filmmaker behind the film, the way they want to present things, really changes how you experience essentially the same story. Because let's be honest, like, there's barely any changes here.
Yeah,
Barely any changes.
there's just stuff left out, and they're moved around a little bit.
Exactly, yeah. It's just simplifying it, removing bits and pieces, but there's no, like, it's the same ending, it's the same major plot points, major beats. Um, yeah. Do you guys feel that this could still be considered a relevant story in 2025? Because we have a very contemporary film, but then a very. You said, Carson, what's the period here? We're talking modern literature. Would say mid-century modern
Mid-century
American literature.
American. Yeah.
Yeah. And all three of us come from three different countries, two continents. You know, we'll just say, generally speaking, we're not talking just about the film, even the book, or both, to be honest. Would you say it's a story that's still relevant? Like, what we could even, I could even go one step further and ask, why would they make this film in 2021 in a way that the book couldn't just hold on its own? And in a way, just parentheses, I think it's good that we are having this conversation, because it's actually pushed the three of us to actually read the book and discover Thomas Savage. I do want to read more of his
Agreed.
books now, so that's a positive. But yeah, I don't know if maybe Tuomas, maybe you have some thoughts. It's a bit of a loaded question, so I apologize in advance.
They made it because Netflix was giving famous directors money, and
She needed
Campion
work.
wanted to make it.
Simple.
I don't know.
I like it.
I think I'm not sure I would say it's relevant because it's not exactly a hot topic thing, even though it's about hot topic things. But in the specific way it's told, it's not like a mainstream thing that this is the thing that people are talking about, and this is something that really matters right now. Even though the ideas about masculinity and performance, they're never irrelevant. They're always relevant, and they continue to be. But it's the specific ways it does them that are kind of old, even though we can intellectualize them and we can totally still see them as things that are ever present. So it's a bit yes and a bit no also.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I get it. I don't know, Carson, if you have some thoughts on this.
I agree with that. I mean, I think the core here, as far as looking at sexuality, as far as looking at masculinity, like these are things that will always be relevant in some way, right? I mean, especially now with this rise, I think globally, of like returning to a certain form of masculinity and kind of destroying the mythology around that, and kind of analyzing the mythology around that and kind of the effects of that. There's clear relevancy to be found. Do I think there's probably like 1,000 other stories that are more directly addressing the modern moment than this? Yeah, I think you probably could find a lot more relevant examples. So if the question is just, is it relevant? Yeah, I would say it's still relevant to a point. I don't think it's necessarily a story though that like if you read it now, it's like, wow, it's so core and crucial to our current moment that we need to re-bring this back, into the culture. I think it's okay where it was. As far as why do they want to make it in 2021, the answer lives and dies with Jane Campion, and her thoughts on herself as a filmmaker, her thoughts on I need to tell this story. Probably there's some heavy Oscar bait. Yeah, well, her hubris. Anyone who goes up accepting an award and says, "Well, actually, I'm better than Venus and Serena Williams because I actually compete against men, unlike them." It says something about that person. And when you have people on film Twitter saying, "No, it's okay that she said that because I know she was so apologetic. I was at the after party and she just seemed off." It says something about how we're viewing that person also as a culture, right? So, I don't know.
If I wanted to simplify it, it's about relevant things, but not in a relevant way.
It's very well put.
But Nick, I feel like I would love your opinion on it because you watched this story and had a very personal reaction to, like, you are an example of someone who this movie, this story, whether or not it was, for whatever reason, in this modern moment, you had a reaction where this pushed you in a certain way. So, like, do you disagree? I assume you would disagree with that statement, though.
I had a conversation, I don't remember with whom, 2-3 years ago. Someone that was part of the queer community who said that we shouldn't have stories about people who are still coming out, who are closeted. There's all those things like, oh, we need to move forward as a society because, we just need to take it for granted and normalize it and blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, I mean, yes, I think generally speaking, we should portray queerness, trans people, non-binary, everything, asex especially at this point, and everything in between, the entire spectrum should be represented as very matter of fact. I'm very happy that nowadays I'm watching a lot of movies that are made 2024, 25, where you just have those little things, whether it's just a day thrown here, or someone asking pronouns, or someone who's just trans and no one ever says the word trans or makes jokes about it. It's just a person existing, a character in a film. I think we are making a strong progress, but I also do still think, especially now, like if you'd asked me this 2021, I would have said something different, but I think especially now it's still important to have stories about closetedness and the dangers of it. Like if the way that I experienced it back in 2021, it was very much, oh, you're watching the worst case scenario. The only other time that I really felt like this watching a movie, and it was like the last turning point for me to embrace all of this, was I saw the TV Glow. It's like you're watching the worst case scenario of what happens if you keep denying to yourself who you are. And in here, you see, I've known like the fact that Phil makes jokes about the paper flowers, it was just a nice simple gesture, a cute little thing, and he
Mm,
has to berate the kid for doing
yeah,
that to prove how he's just a little girl. I think the F word is thrown around a couple of times in the film. It's
yeah.
mentioned with I don't know if it's mentioned in the book actually. I'm blanking on
It's
it.
not. I specifically paid attention to it. It,
Yeah,
it
okay, interesting,
Nancy,
interesting. But it is
it,
in the film, right?
yeah,
Carson, you rewatch it as well. They do mention it.
Yeah, it's in the film.
it's Little Lord Fauntleroy, Nancy Boy, Sissy,
Yeah,
Princess, and stuff like that, but not faggot.
true, true. There's also like a lot of fatso constantly towards
Yeah,
George. Again, like you, we haven't mentioned fatso for the entire conversation. It took us 1 hour to get here. Um, no, but yeah, you're seeing the worst case scenario of someone who denies himself who he is, who pretends to be someone he is not, and is just angry about it.
mm,
In a way, he cannot even truly understand, maybe, or connect with emotionally. He's always keeping a distance even from himself, and he just finds pleasure in making other people's lives miserable because his own life, at the end of the day, is miserable. And watching that, I think, hit me in that sense, despite the ending, because it ends on like this weird thrillery note of like, oh my god, he killed him on purpose. It's like, sure, but that's not what the story actually left me with. The story left me with that moment of connection, of the hands touching, of the looks, of the, oh my god, something did happen in the past, and maybe he could have been someone else. He could have been someone different. He could have been someone better, honestly. He could have. He didn't. And I think that's what, yeah, really connected with me back then. And rewatching it now, I can still feel some of those feelings. But then again, it's been over 4 years, and I've grown and changed,
yeah.
um, thankfully. And the book hits those notes really strongly. You mentioned it as well, Tuomas, especially. Like the way that sequence is written hits like a freight train.
Yeah. I think when the idea is said that we have to move past coming out of the closet stories, it feels like a thing a person says who only watches movies which are mass marketed to them. Because everything, all of it exists. You can find a lot of radical, great queer media. You just have to look for it. So the idea that we have to move past the stories where people come out of the closet, we don't. But they should. But I guess I agree in the way that they shouldn't be the ones that are the mass marketed ones. That they can be
Yes.
more things and more interesting things, but they're not bad just because they exist and get made.
No, totally.
Uh, by the way, I actually think we haven't talked about this, but what have you landed on when it comes to your identity?
My personal one.
Yeah,
I've landed on pansexual officially. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, yeah. Since
Uh,
February 2024, after my second screening of I Saw
Since the
the TV
screening of I
Glow,
Saw the TV Glow.
yeah.
another Jane, our preferred Jane of choice, I think,
The better
Jane
change.
Schomburn.
Yeah, but yeah, I thought that was really funny to observe because I think I've seen based when I still had Twitter and the way you had your account and the things that were on it. I was like, there's something there, but we never talked about it.
True, 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 true. Yeah, 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 yeah.
It
How
reminds me
things
almost of
change.
reminds me of a quote of like if you were to say like a male author showing a sign of emotion makes him inherently a feminine writer. It feels
Mm,
like that where it's like maybe you need to explore more of the media being produced by the certain community
mhm,
that you're talking about and then
yeah,
have a nuanced take. Nick, I am curious though because you obviously saw this pivotal time in your life back in 2021, revisiting it now on this other side of this beautiful journey that is so
The
amazing
other
and I'm so
side of the
proud of you for
rainbow.
that other side of the rainbow. How did the film I think overall just like grow for you, and did you watching this now feel just the same emotions, or how did that relationship change if it
I
did?
didn't I didn't feel the same emotions in a way. I still found it to be just really watchable for me. I think there's the dark humor of the book is pretty well translated, I would say, to the film. There's entire conversation, where George just really can't tell Phil, just take a damn shower, you know. Her nibs, they're coming for dinner. Please take a shower. Please just wash yourself. You stink. Um, there are fun
God,
parts like that. Um,
God word his nibs. It's so great.
and how what's the I remember it's like what do they call the mother and father? It's like
The
gent,
old gent
the
and
whole
the
gents,
old lady.
the old gent and the old lady. It's just like, oh, it's amazing. I also love how Phil just like it's something Savage explicitly writes, but also Cumberbatch brings to life is how his English gets worse whenever he's upset. Otherwise, he speaks really fluently and formally, and like he is a man of culture despite working as a ranchman, which is again going against expectation for 1967, I guess as well. It's going against a stereotype of the ranchman, the cowboy is just someone who's man of the land, you know. But no, in terms of my feelings, they haven't changed too much. I still really like the film. I do still connect with it. I still had the pleasure watching it and watching the behind the scenes for the first time. Um, but I did see for the first time ever, as I mentioned, I did see the negatives that you were talking about, especially after having this conversation. I never really understood what you meant by, when I say you, I mean Carson, of course, for listeners, just what you meant by the negative portrayal of homosexuality. Um, yeah, this time around, I got it. I was like, oh, yeah, I can see that. I can
Yeah.
see what Carson means, especially now that we're talking about it.
Yeah, I don't feel as strongly about it, but I think I'm on some kind of wavelength with it. That I don't necessarily love it, but I don't also hate it either.
It's serviceable. Again,
Mm.
I think at the end of the day, I mean, I mean, we can go into full fan fiction, like proper fan fiction, if you want now. I think if I were to adapt the story, I don't know if I would have Phil die at the end.
Mm.
But then again, what happens?
Yeah,
What's the
that's a big
point? Like,
question.
where's the story going if Phil cannot die? If you minimize the queerness of him, you then embrace the thriller aspect. But if you put more of an emphasis and a spotlight on him being a closeted homosexual, which is what Campion does, how can you make an engaging film that still has to end with a kid manipulating him and finding a way to kill him, basically?
Maybe I wouldn't make it that he kills him, that he ends up dying, but it's not because of an intention. It's
Just happenstance.
yeah.
Yeah, that could be
I
it.
think I would keep the death. I mean, if I was adapting this, I think it's pretty brutal to Savage to be like, actually, your catharsis of killing your stepfather, we're just gonna kick out.
Denied.
Valid. I think what I would do is probably, because I think the biggest issue is you have to see both of these perspectives and like fully understand them. I'd probably do a massive shift in perspective. I would have the first part be all about Phil, really get into his character,
Yeah.
really get into even his queerness is fine to bring up here as a little bit, but then I would radically shift where you're just from Peter's perspective, and all you get is just his perspective of the barrage of the attacks, of the venom, of the villainous. So I think that action at the end, it would be more contained in the sense that you understand where he's coming from, but at the same time, then you also get that complexity of Phil. I think that's probably how I would do it. But it's a really difficult novel to adapt, I will say. Like, really
Yes.
a wild choice.
Yes. And I would also add, I do think having the character of the father of Johnny Gordon, the doctor, present a little, not more heavily, but just be part of the story. I think you mentioned it, Thomas, in the beginning. It was like it's basically a tombstone
Yeah.
in this film. In the book, he's a fully fleshed character. I mean, you could make a movie out of his character, a short film out of everything that happens with him and the tragedy of his life. But in the book, it's essential to have that part because it plays almost like a revenge. What happens at the end?
Mm.
The fact that Peter is indirectly killing Phil. He's also saving his mother in the present, and he's also avenging his father, which is completely missing in the film. Maybe for the better. I think in the film it might have felt a bit weird to have that as well.
Mm.
Yeah.
I think you could easily include him, but it would have to be like a 2.5 hour movie, and it would be the end of the first act when he dies.
Yeah, yeah, that could be interesting. Yeah, I can see that. But then again, I'm pretty content with the film that we got.
Yeah.
Do you have any final thoughts about Jane Campion's The Power of the Dog, Tuomas?
Mm, not really. I have to watch it again because I didn't watch it in time. I have a set of speakers coming out, so
Hey,
I'm gonna get to listen to the music in proper surround sound.
nice, 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 nice. And how about you, Carson? You've slightly changed my opinion. How do you feel about that after this
I feel
conversation?
terrible about that. I wish I didn't even come on today then. I feel horrible. I don't want people to be miserable bastards like I am. Like I'm down to be that for myself. I don't want other people to hate media and not enjoy it as much as they did. That feels terrible. I mean, I also don't think you're in the power to have Jane Campion never make another film again. So it wouldn't even be productive for me in that sense. If you were like a studio exec, at least it would have a purpose to it. No, I mean, I would encourage everyone to go read the book. I think the book is really fantastic. I think the movie for me, and, valid again to everyone who likes it or has power in this and loves it. Cinema's for everyone, right? Speak your truth. I think it's just an insane choice that in 2021 we as a culture collectively decided to ignore the massive lack of authenticity in creating this project, and I think it really shows. I think the queerness in this is just very, very not well done, and I think it's just an odd choice again to I don't care if you like or hate the film. This is not defiant or dependent on that. But like this production of this white woman from New Zealand making a queer project about the American West and then just defending every single statement she ever made because it fit your film Twitter narrative. To be honest, this is the movie that killed film Twitter for me. Like, I have no interest engaging with people about film unless like I personally know them and they're on a podcast like this, because I just think it's such a sign of a lack of not only critical thought but actual commitment to authenticity in these stories. And it really did like frustrate me in a lot where so much queer cinema, and we're getting so much better, like I saw the TV Glow, the fact that that's like a household name for people, we've come so far in so many ways, but the fact that there's so much queer cinema breaking down these emotions and representations of queerness and emotions of queerness that just get ignored or get attacked or get whatever you want to say. And then this is the one that film Twitter especially decided to come around and celebrate and say, no, actually anyone who criticizes is wrong. This is the queer outing of the Midwest. I think it's disrespectful, to be honest, to the author. I really do. I think this is like a bad take on his book. I think it's a bad take on like these types of stories. I think we're luckily moving in a point where I don't think this film would have been made with Jane Campion anymore. I genuinely think that. But no, it's a movie I hate. I really hate this one. So, but valid everyone again who likes it. Not trying to be that person. Just like for me, I have a lot of issues.
I don't think we're getting Jane Campion as a guest on this podcast anytime soon. How about you then, Tuomas? I can imagine where this is going for all of us. Carson has already spoken his truth. Which version of The Power of the Dog do you prefer? The Thomas Savage book or the
Definitely.
film?
Definitely the book. I love the film, and I think there's a chance that I like it more than I like it last time when I watched it for the third time. But still, the amount of perspectives and the depth the book has, it's so much better than the movie. The movie it works as a movie, and I think as a visual experience, it works. But I was really missing the aspects of like letting the parents say things, and then the things that disrupted the rhythm.
Mm-hmm.
I think the movie is a little bit too much of a clean construction in that way.
Yeah, more than fair. More than fair. I have to agree, actually. I also really, I would say, yeah, the book 100% over the film. I also still really like the movie, but there's, I want to say it's one of the best books I've read this year. Definitely one of the best books we've had to read for the podcast. We've done on the podcast this year because it's so multi-layered. It's so well written. Like I cannot stress enough just how easy of a read it is,
Yes.
despite the topic. Like I was dreading it. I'm not gonna lie. I was like, woof. Like, is it gonna be like boring scenes on a ranch? It's like, no, it's so engaging. It's constantly moving. It's constantly keeping you engaged with these characters and how they're feeling and what they're doing and why they're doing it. And the jumps in time are so seamlessly integrated. It was a true joy to read, despite the dark subject matter at its core. And I'm really, if anyone's listening to this podcast and they're massive Thomas Savage fans, please let us know which books to read next, because I do want to jump into more of his books. It sucks that they're just not really available. I was actually touring. I'm currently in Berlin. I was touring some bookstores, and outside of finding the movie tie-in of Power of the Dog with the god awful cover of Benedict Cumberbatch's back, I've not been able to find a single Thomas Savage book. I
This is
don't know
one
if
I have.
either of you. That's the one. That's a nice one. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I wonder if it's like maybe the original cover, but it's definitely one of the like it's the Goodreads official cover. Um but yes. With that being said, before we close things off, Tuomas, do you have written down your favorite passage or quote from the book that you'd like to read out?
I can pull up the page.
If you want, maybe Carson can go while you're looking for it, or
I have my quote. Yeah, I listen to
go ahead.
audiobooks, so I could not tell you the page number. But Phil knew what it was to be a pariah, and he had loathed the world should it loathe him first. I think it's really beautiful. I think it's obviously just like a really classic capturing of this character and his views on
Nice
the
one.
world. So I love it. So
Mine is the part where he's describing his collection. I'm not gonna read the in. Let me see. Could you go first, Nicola?
Yeah, I can go. Mine is actually the passage when he has that interaction with Phil towards with Peter, sorry, towards the climax of the book. After Peter gives him the rawhides, what I've got, and everything, the passage reads, "Take what I've got. You've been good." Phil, at that moment in place, that smelled of years, felt in his throat what it felt once before, and dear God knows never expected nor wanted to feel again. For the loss of it breaks your heart. It was like, oh.
Yeah.
It's one of those passages I had to read it twice. Like, fuck. Just like denying yourself connection, just like basic human connection with someone else because you feel the loss afterwards, not wanting to feel that again. It's kind of like, Carson, we love it. Call me by your name, like you're just denying so much of yourself. What a waste of. Same vibe. Same vibe. Have you found it, Thomas? I'm excited.
Yes.
The build up, the anticipation.
Yes. Mine is when Phil is describing his bookcase. It's about half a page long. I'm not going to read the entire thing, but I'm going to read this part. He was the skull of a wolf, a stone marten he had trapped, killed, skinned, stuffed, and mounted realistically, its sinuous body alert on a small log. Each object reflected some facet of his gift and talent, his stunning ability to grasp what others missed, his monumental patience. It's just the sucking himself off his egoism. It's so beautiful.
Great passage. Great passage. And what about scene then? What's your favorite scene from the movie while you're at it?
This is a tough one because I didn't watch it freshly. So I'm gonna have to say I don't remember.
Oh, fair enough. Fair enough. How about you, Carson?
the credits. No, I'm kidding. That's up there. I guess it'd really be any scene where it's just Jesse Plemons and Kirsten Dunst. Again, when they're just holding each other in that wind and outside, like I think that tenderness again really, really shines through to where like I just constantly wish the story was just about them because I think that connects so much more wonderfully than anything else in the movie. But it's difficult for me just because again I don't like the movie. So
I can take two for you then. For Thomas. No, I do. You mentioned that scene, and I do love when they go out. Jesse Plemons and Kirsten Dunst just having the picnic, their first picnic, and he just starts tearing up and moves away from her, kind of like not to show his emotions to her. And when she goes to investigate, he just tells her, I've written it down. It was like on my letterbox review. He wrote, I wanted to say how nice it is not to be alone. It's like, fuck. Ouch. Yeah. Yeah. I get it, man. I get it. I can only imagine what it must have been like to live those experiences and be there at that time, and just to finally not be alone anymore, especially like the fact that he says it and he's spending the entire day surrounding by other men, always with his brother by his side, and to admit he was feeling alone throughout all of that is rough. um but my favorite scene, which is a scene that I really really like, and I am a sucker for scenes without dialogue, and I called it the musical torment. The entire sequence where Rose is forced to play piano for
Oh
his
my god.
nibs and her nibs. Um, and she just, it's something she doesn't want to do, but she's forced to do. It's just gonna be fine, relax, it's gonna be okay. Which is one of the worst things. Again, something that Thomas Savage gets in the book, and it's well portrayed in the film as well. It's just like that pressure of like other people telling you how to do something, especially artistic. And it's like, no, just play some tunes. It's just tunes I want. I don't want any. I don't want a ditty. I want a tune. It's fine. No, that's not how it works. And if she says no, it's no. And again, like society at the time, even to this day, it happens so many times. But the sequence where she's just practicing at the piano and feels slowly bad walks into his room, and she keeps messing up a fairly simple tune. It's a tune I used to be able to play in the piano, which made it even funnier watching it in the film. And he completely outshines her with a banjo. It's a psychological torment taken to an extreme. It's a playful scene. I think it's some of the dark comedy comes into play, but the way it's shot, again, it's shot like a thriller. It's all very darkly lit, and the camera keeps moving as she plays and stops when she stops. It just a beautiful sequence. It's none of the queerness. It's none of the other parts. I just really really like this sequence. I loved it back then, and I still love it now, and I love it just as much as I loved this conversation.
Actually, I think I do have a scene.
You have a scene?
Uh,
Go then.
yes, it's the discussion between Peter and Phil, where Peter remarks about how his father was concerned that he's too tough, and Phil dismisses it. I think it was a nice way of seeing where Peter's remark comes off as not truthful, but you can still believe it, while Phil totally doesn't believe it because he's so certain that he can tell how Peter is just based on his physical appearance, even though Peter's father is completely right because he's thinking about mental strength and not about physical strength. And he was thinking about coldness in relation to warmth, and he was seeing that in Peter, which totally exists. So
He's a
that,
psychopath in the making.
yeah, I thought that was definitely one of the more interesting moments because it had that nuance, which the book has.
It's a nice passage. You're right. It's a nice scene. Um, Thank you. Then this is it for this episode of Anatomy of an Adaptation. Thank you both for joining me. Tuomas, if our listeners wanted to follow you online, where can they find you or your writing?
Uh, I mainly have an account on Letterboxd, and my username is now changed. It's Laitu, Laituu, and but the name is Tuomas on it.
Perfect. And how about you, Carson?
You can find me on Letterboxd and Blue Sky, just Carson Timar. Letterboxd. I don't think I said Letter Sky. I don't know. Letterboxd Carson Timar. That's really the only place where I'm active. And as well as you can follow me on these podcasts, but also Clappercast. I host every single week, pretty much reviewing old and new movies. Nick is on there all the time. So if you want more of our conversations, or if you want to hear myself, Jack, Michael, whoever is on there with me, talk about good cinema, bad cinema, mid cinema. come by. We did a Power of the Dog episode back in 2021, so even if you want to go in the archives, you can find it there. But yeah.
See how things have not changed
Right.
in 4 years. Yes, definitely go listen to Clappercast, and of course, all those links, including Tuomas's letterboxd, will be in the show notes below. Meanwhile, you can follow me everywhere at NikkiGran97. You can find my short films on YouTube and Vimeo to enjoy the movies, and of course, you can follow this podcast on Instagram to stay up to date with all new and upcoming episodes at Anatomy of Adaptation Pod. Stay tuned, because I hope you all like Carson, because he's coming back. Because the next episode, we will be talking about Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the 1941 original, the 1994 Kenneth Branagh adaptation, and the latest by Guillermo del Toro. So stay tuned for that. We hope you have a lovely, lovely day, and we hope to see you soon. Goodbye.